This is a skip it for me. That's it. That's all I got. I said everything I gotta say, man. I said like what you. I could end off with like a little, but I'm just going to say it's a skip it.
It's a
I know,
skip
but
it, and then I'm going to
every
close
time
on
you
the
tell
vignette
us-
of your head. Yeah.
Yeah, every time you tell us, it's gonna be a really quick, like, you know what the telltale sign is? When you tell us, I'm gonna be really quick about this, it's a blah, then you start talking longer. It's just when
Yeah.
you're like, guys, I'm gonna be honest, it's a skip it.
And
And
that's
that's it. And you just, that's it. You just kind of don't say anything after that.
Hello and welcome to the movie podcast review of Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. My name is Daniel. I am one of your hosts today, and joining alongside me are my fellow adventurers, Anthony
Hello.
and Shahbaz.
Let's go on an adventure.
I like is that an impression of someone, or is that just your adventure voice?
I started it mentally by I was gonna do the voice of Salah, Jonathan Rhys-Davies,
Right.
and then so quickly in the middle of it, I'm like, oh, maybe I should do Harrison Ford though. But my mind didn't decide at what time it should do which impression. So I think it was both of them.
It was
just
both at the same time. It
together.
definitely felt
Yeah.
like a collaboration of both voices coming through.
That's what it was. That's what it was.
I liked it. Jay, since we're talking to you right now, how are you doing?
You know, I'm doing great. I'm doing. Oh, that was too excited.
Oh.
I think I was too excited.
Now
about
I'm a little suspicious. I'll be
I
honest.
know.
I kind of want to jump to Anthony now because I don't trust what you're about to tell me.
I know. I'm feeling good, man. I'm having a good time. We just came off a very, very long week. 5 movies in theaters, and boy, are my arms tired. So yeah.
Yeah, we did. This is probably one of the busiest weeks outside of, a film festival, outside of TIFF for us, because on the Monday, we had Transformers, and then later in the week we had, The Flash, Elemental, Asteroid City, Indiana Jones, Dial of Destiny. It was a really compact week. So it's fun. It's nice. This is a summer movie season, but I felt like we knocked out all of the June movies, all in one week. And now we just kind of prepare ourselves and, bunker down until July comes. So we'll see what happens. Anthony, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm also a little not exhausted, but just withered from or weathered. Weathered is the word, not withered. Weathered from just
You could be both though if you want.
the amount of stuff that we did last week. It was just, and it's also like unexpected because every day is like a new adventure, like Indiana Jones. But
It is.
we don't know what's coming, and then we're on another adventure. So yeah,
It's true. It's like Indiana Jones, but with just a little bit less Nazis in the world, hopefully, than his time period. Or maybe not. We don't know. But yeah, last week we also had a bunch of interviews that kind of sprung up on us because, of course, this is the movie podcast. We're going to do interviews. We're going to have reviews. And we're going to have discussions on all the latest and greatest movies. I kind of just went right into that segue. Just kind of rode the wave of that. There are so many incredible episodes out right now that we would love for you to check out, including all of our coverage of Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. We have interviews with the cast, the directors, and then we also have an interview with Daniel Pemberton, which is a bit of an extended interview. Shay, I know you're looking at. I kind of extended some of my words too. I'm being a little suspicious.
You had like an accent, like almost
I did,
Swedish.
yeah.
I think we also have. No, actually, you know what? It was a little Nazi.
It was a little Mads
Oh my
Mikkelsen
God.
in Indiana Jones.
we
also have. I'm not going to do it
he's
anymore.
the one.
I'm gonna
He's
stop.
the one that we should be getting, Anthony. You and I are Indiana Jones and Salah.
Guys, I've been German this whole time. You just did not realize
no.
it. I'm not going to do it. I'm so sorry to all of our German listeners.
That's my job.
You're the accent man. But no, we have some incredible interviews out, including an interview I'm really proud of that we got to do with. We had about 20 minutes with Daniel Pemberton, who is the composer behind Across the Spider-Verse, as well as some of our favorite films over the last couple of years. Thank you to Daniel for joining us on the show. Go check that out. If you loved Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, you're going to want to dive deep with us into this. You've seen the movie, you heard the soundtrack. Now let's dive into a conversation with the person who actually made it all happen on the sound wise. It's pretty incredible. And of course, make sure you follow all of the incredible coverage that we have here on the Movie Podcast. Make sure you follow us on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and Letterboxd. If you're watching this on YouTube, please, subscribe, leave a comment below, and leave us 5 stars on, Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, wherever you're listening to us. And of course, join our Discord. We have some incredible conversations going on in there. We will open up a spoiler room for Indiana Jones. We have a bunch open up right now for shows like Secret Invasion, for Across the Spider-Verse, and a lot more. So stay tuned for all of that and more. But today is all about Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. This film is releasing in theaters on June 30th. And I want to say thank you to our friends at Disney Studios Canada for inviting us to watch the film and for giving us some really, really cool interviews. So stay tuned for all of that. We're not going to tell you who yet, but you will see on our feed very, very soon. So stay tuned for all of that. Let's get right into it. Of course, this is Harrison Ford returning for the 5th and final, we're assuming it has to be the final entry in the Indiana Jones saga. I'm going to kick it over to Anthony for your first reactions. Anthony, I would love your first reactions, but also your kind of thoughts going into this film. And of course, we will stay spoiler free.
I would have said, a month ago that Indy was going to be my most anticipated film of the year. It's just been a really long time. The last one came out in 2008. It didn't kind of hit me like the other ones had, but I was expecting this movie to be, that summer blockbuster that I was looking forward to. It had James Mangold behind it. And boy, oh boy, was I wrong. Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny fails to deliver the joy and adventure that many of us have anticipated when we were looking forward to the adventure that this last Indy was going to be on, and man, it was a disappointing watch. It felt like a movie that had an identity crisis. It almost felt like James Mangold couldn't disconnect from the Steven Spielberg look and feel of a movie, and he eventually just made a rejected clone from it. I don't know if you guys felt that same way, but that's how I kind of look at it. It doesn't have that James Mangold vibe that we got from Ford versus Ferrari or Logan. It just feels like this doppelganger of an Indiana Jones story. And truthfully, I can't believe the story that the creative team created for this actually is this is the story that would send off Indy. I am shocked that the studio didn't stop it or maybe reshoot it or revise it, because man, this movie had a pointless ending. It had an awful send off for Indiana Jones. It just didn't connect. It was tedious to watch. It was boring. There are things that work for this film. Truthfully, the beginning sequence to this movie is fantastic. It takes place in Germany. It has the sequence where you've seen in the trailer, young Indiana Jones is captive and held by Nazis, and again he has to fight
Well, let's not just young Indiana Jones, de-aged Harrison
Jones.
Ford. Yeah, so it's not like a The Last Crusade type of opening. It, like
Right,
Anthony said, it
right.
is the sequences that you keep seeing in the trailers where they're showing a younger Indy that we're probably used to seeing in Raiders of the Lost Ark in that era.
Exactly. And that sequence was fantastic. I friggin' love that sequence. It was
Amazing.
so well shot. It was so well told. It kind of set the mood for where the story was going. But after that sequence, once you kind of kick into older Indy, it just loses that speed. It loses the excitement. It loses everything about Indiana Jones. It didn't even feel like an Indiana Jones movie. I remember telling you guys, how many times did we actually see Harrison Ford even talk in this film? Because it just didn't feel like he was even there, even though it's a movie about him. There were so many other characters that are in this.
The presence wasn't there, right?
It wasn't.
Like you didn't feel the presence of Indy, for sure.
There's a play on Indiana Jones being too old for the adventures that he's on, but like truthfully, Harrison Ford is too old to be on this movie. There are times where you just know it, you can see it, you can feel it. He's just, it sucks because you want to see Harrison Ford play Indiana Jones, but it's also you could clearly tell, like, yeah, he's not running in that scene, or he's having trouble running, or he's having trouble catching up. He's also 78 and he's doing things that no 78-year-old would be able to do at that age, jumping from cart to cart and all that stuff. It's just a little disappointing, or a lot disappointing, this movie. It really heavily focuses on or relies on CG as, a substitute for a lot of the scenes, especially if you watch the sequence when they're in Tangiers and they're racing through the city. There's a lot of in-car sequence, and you could tell that they weren't shooting outdoors. They were shooting on a green screen, behind a green screen, and you could actually see like the outlines of these characters that were very,
A little bit of the halo around them, right?
very distracting.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely a halo. And there were parts where we were talking about this in the car where that they were actually on location in uh, Morocco or in Sicily or in New York, but it just felt like a lot of it was shot in a studio as well. Like, why wouldn't you just shoot a lot of these live action shots, these practical things there? And we were talking about how COVID could have been a big part of this, this production. And I really, really hope that this movie was going to be good. And when it came out during Cannes and it had that whole standing ovation, which was lackluster, I remember reading that in the title. It just
A
felt,
lackluster standing ovation.
and it was like a 5-minute lackluster standing ovation. I
Yeah.
think that's what
And
they
I feel
said.
like it was more for Harrison Ford than anything,
And
right?
yeah, and Harrison Ford got a longer one after. I was just blown away that, man, you have James Mangold, who came off of Ford versus Ferrari, who told this story about two guys building a car, and it was so wonderfully done. And you expected him to take on Indy and just elevate it and give it that style and that vibe that he, as a director, should be doing, like his own take. But at the end of it, it became a Spielberg knockoff, and I just was shocked that this was something that actually came out. And you hear it a lot. You hear a lot. These movies, they go through reshoots and revisions, and I just couldn't understand how the studio would be able to say, "This is the send off for Indiana Jones. This is the fond farewell that we want to give him." And I was just like, that's so wrong.
It's funny you mentioned, though, especially with Ford versus Ferrari and James Mangold, because also you look at what he did with Logan, where you have a character who's been around for 2 decades at that point, and you gave them a really incredible send off of what their character, that's true to who their character was, and it didn't feel like we got any type of send off with Indy in this. But I do want to say, and I echo you, Anthony, and I know Shay, the sentiment's the same for you. The first 20 minutes of Dial of Destiny is amazing. It is everything I could have hoped for in an Indiana Jones film, especially, or well, mostly because it's in Nazi Germany. And I think Indiana Jones works best when he's fighting Nazis. And yes, Mads Mikkelsen and crew, they are Nazis. They are trying to, change the world and do whatever they want to do. But when you take it out of, that 40s time period, and this is the same issue that Kingdom of the Crystal Skull had when you set it in the 50s, it loses a little bit of the purpose of what this character kind of was. And I think the Nazis are in film side, easy, like classic good guys for Indy to fight because they're evil, and Indiana Jones will always fight against that, right? And when you have their inclusion in this film, it's really interesting because this film takes place mostly in 1969, and it introduces a lot of new elements into the Indiana Jones world that is not, obviously, it's Indiana Jones is full of different, magic and spiritual and aliens that we saw in the last film, and then there's new elements get introduced in this one that make it a little bit too out of reach and a little bit too out there than I think works best when it's just Indiana Jones punching a Nazi in the face. Shahbaz, jump on in.
Yeah, there are some telltale signs when we're watching a movie together that it's not going well. The experience of the film isn't resonating with us. And one of those is when we're watching something and none of us have kind of said to each other, what do you think so far? None of us has said like, hey, so what's going on?
Yeah, no
I
one's
think
leaning over.
no one's leaning over. And if we're leaning over, like I think I leaned over to you at one point to talk about something else, Daniel. I can't remember what it was. And then to Anthony, I'm like, what's going on? And like it just, there was a level of confusion throughout the entire film because that first 20 minutes, like you guys said, oh, it's I was like, when it started, I'm like, how is this movie getting bad buzz? It
Mhm.
feels like it's hitting all the right notes. This seems like the Indiana Jones film that I was promised. James Mangold has injected something into here that feels like his own, but still pays tribute to the entire franchise before it. And then so quickly after, does it completely fall flat. And it's such an unfortunate situation because you have a great cast here. We have Boyd Holbrook, who we had on our show, who I think is such a phenomenal actor because he's able to kind of teeter this line of charming yet asshole. And he did such a great job in The Sandman. Then also you look back at Logan, where he was a really good villain in that movie.
Mhm.
And obviously directed by James Mangold as well. And in here, he's relegated to just being like a henchman, barely any lines, kind of just going from scene to scene, chasing down Indiana, and there's absolutely not much of a connection between these characters. It's really Mads who's this evil villain, and Mads Mikkelsen I love to death, but isn't really given much here other than Mads, stare at the camera. Okay, look a little menacing. Don't really have a line here. Say something ominous. There could have been so much given to him. You look back at his performance of Lashifa in Casino Royale, and he is such a good menacing actor. In anything else he does, also he's got. Even
He's
if
the
you look
classic
back at
villain in everything, right? He's
classic
just
villain,
always a villain.
but then Daniel, you look at a movie like Rogue One, where he's a bad guy for sure, but heart of gold, and it works as well. So Mads can play both sides. And then you have someone like Antonio Banderas, who I guess is kind of like a cameo in the Smell film. I can't tell what exactly his purpose was in this movie because he doesn't really have any lines either, and he's kind of relegated to being in the background. And then you have Phoebe Waller-Bridge, who I don't know too much about. I thought she was just okay. She didn't really excite me. She didn't push the movie forward. Her character wasn't very lovable, and that's kind of a bummer because you keep hearing about how fantastic she is, and I'm not basing the rest of her personality and who she is off of just this one movie. But she wasn't really the ticket seller, or wasn't really the one kind of pushing this movie forward for me at all. There's a lot of spotty CG. You even have another young character in this movie where, kind of like how we had Short Round before, we get another young character in this one called Teddy, who again also doesn't really do much. He's not really annoying or anything like that, but he's there as a plot device for one of the silliest third acts I think I've seen in the film all year, where it just kind of, what something should be exciting and it becomes really silly and really stupid. Like if you thought Aliens in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull was a big leap, this is going to be like, this is the ending of the film, you did this and you expect us to be okay with it, because the crime of that ending is it's extremely boring. It has absolutely no payoff. And when it ended, there was this, when the final scene was occurring, I know for a fact this is the one time where all three of us were kind of like, is what's happening right now real? Are
Yeah,
we
I
is
remember leading to you, Shahbaz, and saying like, I'm confused.
like,
Like I literally was
I
confused.
felt we felt unsettled. We felt like something is about to happen right now. It's going to be a big fake out. Bombs are going to go off. It's going to turn out to be a dream all the way, and then it just vignettes on the hat and closes the scene, and we're like, oh, the movie's done. That's the ending of Indiana Jones, and it felt disrespectful to the character. I was so bummed out. You can have a great opening sequence in a movie, but when 90% of the rest of the film is boring, uninspired, feels like it's trying to imitate what Steven Spielberg has brought before, you really lost me, and I'm so bummed out by that. I definitely thought that the Cannes reviews and everything were just a reflection on maybe that audience kind of being out of touch or not wanting to like blockbusters or whatever it could be. I was like, no, there's no way. James
You try and
Mangold,
make it
Indiana
make
Jones,
sense, right?
you try and make
like,
it make sense.
please. Yeah.
And again, we go to every film with the idea of let's just have a great time with this. Let's forget about what we've heard and let's have fun. And then when it ends up matching what we've heard, we're like, damn, that's disappointing.
Before I go, Anthony, I know you had something to say. I'd love for you to jump in.
Oh, I just wanted to say, like, the action sequences in this movie are really well done, but they don't lead to anything, and they usually become a little bit too long. I don't know if you've noticed that. Like, it felt certain
Yeah,
ones
definitely.
felt very, very long. In terms of Phoebe Waller-Bridge, she's such a talented actress, they use her in such a way that is the moment you see her and the moment you understand her character, it's such a foreshadowing of what to expect from her. And I think when you have a little bit of mystery with the character, I think that would have been better for the whole experience with her, because I feel like Disney wants to create maybe spin-offs of Indiana Jones with her in the mix, because there are vibes of her being an adventurous person and doing all these things, and she's also a woman, so it's a completely different uh dynamic and diversity thing. But it just her character just kind of felt like, yeah, I've seen her character before on screen many times. Why would you write her in like this? Why would we have this such a generic character that we've experienced before?
Yeah, and I want to jump off that point. I think, you mentioned the action. There's some really cool set pieces in this film, but exactly like you said, Anthony, they go on really way too long, and also it just kind of turns into like, oh, it's just a chase. Everything turns into like a chase or an escape, or we're trying to
Fetch
catch
quest.
something. It's a fetch quest, and it's like you could only do that so much in a movie, and this movie's long. Like when we say the first 20 minutes of this movie is phenomenal, it is. But you still got another 2 hours and 10 minutes that follow that, right? And when your movie feels like such stop and go, stop and go, stop and go, you're going to feel a little exhausted. Other than the opening sequence, I will say the things that I do like in this film. Obviously, John Williams is returning for the score. He's never going to let us down. That was, it's another banger score. It's the Indiana Jones theme song, which I really do think is probably the greatest film score, the film theme ever in the history of film. That is it's probably my favorite. It gives me chills anytime I think about it. I'm getting goosebumps right now. And it is used pretty effectively and often throughout this film. Like we said, there are some really cool action set pieces, but because things go on a little too long, you just get immediately pulled out of it, or you just got a little confused as to, who's playing who, what's going on here. Yeah, it's, people are going to turn on you. That is a classic, charm of Indiana Jones, that you're going to get characters that turn on you. You're going to get characters you trust, and then they don't, that you can't trust them anymore, and then you do trust them. That is just part of, what makes an Indiana Jones movie an Indiana Jones movie. But when you have a story that's just boring, I think that's the biggest crime you could do, is that you made an Indiana Jones film that is the majority of the time boring, and you feel just so disconnected. And we spoke about Harrison Ford, who, Harrison Ford is Harrison Ford. He's playing more Harrison Ford at this point than he's playing Indiana Jones, where he's playing that, that curmudgeon who doesn't want to, want to do things. But when he gets called to action and he wants to do stuff, it's great seeing those moments. I think we look at the trailer, and some of my favorite sequence in this film, other than the beginning, him horseback going through New York, going through the subway. And then the third act of this film, I was really hoping would go in a direction that would, really change the stakes. And again, we're not going to spoil anything that happens in here, but if you're wondering what the dial of destiny is and what it could do, you could probably just imagine, based on what you've seen in the trailers and what a dial and time and what that's all going to entail. But it really does, I think, take a big leap into a direction where I don't think Indiana Jones really felt like it kind of lives in that space. And maybe if it was used effectively, or if it was used in a different matter, I think it would have maybe played off a little bit better. But because the way they use it is so boring and just so just okay, we're just kind of relegated to not really being in the action. We're kind of far away from it. And I know I'm speaking a little bit, um, not in actual description of what's happening. I don't want to spoil anything, of course, but it really did leave me confused. And I'm not kidding. I literally leaned over to Shay after the big kind of final act. I leaned over to Shay and I'm like, I don't. I'm confused as to what's happening right now, because it just feels like the movie just it slams on the brakes and it just ends, and you're just like, oh, I guess I guess the movie's done. And that's kind of where I was at, where you're getting a lot of stuff, especially in that first 20 minutes, that as an Indiana Jones fan, I loved it. And it just made me so excited. I wish we could have had a whole film set in that time period. And again, who knows in the future? I know right now they're saying this is the end. Who knows if they ever decide to revisit? We have the technology to tell these stories. And if you want to keep telling stories with a DH Harrison Ford, I'm not saying do it. I think Indiana Jones, really the ending of that was The Last Crusade, riding out into the sunset. That really is the end. And it's interesting that we have another character who we look at, Michael Keaton coming back in The Flash, and we have Harrison Ford coming back, and they both had their films in 1989, and since then, anything that we've seen of them in this world hasn't really felt like it's matched anything that has come before. It just feels like we are bringing these characters back to appease that nostalgia. And I think Anthony said it so well in our Flash review, is that if you're just having fan service for fan service sake, then you're not really getting, a real great story out of it. And I feel like James Mangold and the team behind this could have really told a stronger story that felt more of a send-off to this character. And what we got was very much a mixed bag of a great opening and just, a stop and go of the rest of the film that really left my mind after leaving the theater, unfortunately. I would love to get to our final recommendations. Anthony, I'm going to get you to start us off.
This is a skip it for me. That's it. That's all I got. I said everything I gotta say, man. I said, like, what you. I could end off with like a little, but I'm just going to say it's a skip it.
It's a skip it, and then I'm going to close on the vignette of your head. Yeah.
Yeah. Every time you tell us, it's going to be a really quick, like, you know what the telltale sign is? When you tell us, I'm going to be really quick about this, it's a blah. Then you start talking longer. It's just when you're like, guys, I'm going to be honest, it's a skip it.
And
that's it. And you just you just kind of don't say anything after that.
I'll go next. For me, it's hard to say it. It's a skip it for me as well. An incredible opening sequence, some of the great Indiana Jones moments. For me, that's not enough. If you're really curious, I'd say wait for Disney Plus, if anything. But for me, this is a film, when I think back on it, there's not a lot that I could say that really, landed for me outside of that opening sequence of the film. So for me, I'm right there with you. It's a skip it. Shahbaz.
Skip it as well. I think there's frustration around the idea that this is us saying goodbye to the character, because I will not accept it. Like, that's not how I'm sad. Like, that's how you're telling us this is the end. It felt so open-ended, and it felt just so not satisfying. Like, I still don't believe what I watched. Like, it's a bummer. But yeah, skip.
Yeah, it definitely is. Yeah, and like we said, there's a lot in this movie. We spoke about a lot over the last 30 minutes. So let us know what you think. Please leave a comment below. If you're watching this on YouTube, if you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, leave a review, leave a comment. Spotify has a great new option where you could actually comment below on a specific review. So let us know what you think of this movie once you watch it. Join our Discord. Let's have a conversation there. We have an incredible community of movie lovers. Even though this one didn't really land as much for us, we still want to talk about it with you. We still want to keep that conversations going. So please join us there. All the information you need to know is in the show notes below, as well as our socials like Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and Letterboxd. You can follow us at The Movie Podcast. We have some incredible videos on there. That's the best place to find out what we're up to, what reviews, what interviews are coming. So stay tuned for all of that and more. That was this time with The Movie Podcast, and we'll see you next.